In a kingdom filled with towers that touched the sky and streets busy with life, there lived a young queen named Isabella. She was known not only for her beauty, but also for her wisdom and kindness. People from every corner of the land admired her, and many came to the palace just to see the way she ruled with fairness. She always listened to the worries of her people, and she carried her crown not as a burden, but as a promise to protect them. The court was filled with nobles, who often thought they knew better, yet Isabella never let their pride cloud her heart. One evening, the great hall was filled with knights, counselors, and visitors from distant lands. The banners of the kingdom waved high, and the sound of voices echoed across the marble walls. Isabella stood tall, her dress shining with silver thread under the glow of the torches. She had decided that night to speak words that would change the path of her life. No one in the court expected it, for they believed her choice of a partner would be another noble, someone of equal power. Yet her heart had chosen differently. Among the crowd stood Daniel, a man of humble birth. He was not a nobleman, nor did he carry a family name known in the courts. He was a soldier who had risen through hard work and bravery. Many in the kingdom respected him, for he was often seen standing guard at the borders or helping farmers rebuild after storms. His courage was plain for all to see, and though he never sought attention, his actions had spoken louder than words. Isabella had noticed him long before this night, though Daniel never once imagined the queen's gaze resting on him. The court grew quiet as Isabella stepped forward. Every noble leaned closer, waiting for her words. She looked across the hall, and her eyes found Daniel. In that moment, the whispers began, for no one could believe that her gaze had settled on a common soldier. Isabella's voice carried clear and calm, strong enough to reach every corner of the room. She spoke of honor, of loyalty, and of what it truly meant to lead. Then, to the shock of all who listened, she declared her desire. She wished for Daniel, the man who had no title, to stand beside her as her husband. Gasps filled the hall, and the silence that followed was heavy. Many nobles exchanged glances, their pride wounded by the thought of a queen choosing a man without noble blood. Some advisors stirred, ready to object, but the weight of Isabella's words held them still. The guards shifted uneasily, not knowing what to think, while the visitors from other lands watched in silence. And Daniel, who had faced the clash of swords in the heat of battle, felt a rush of fear unlike any he had ever known. He did not fear war, yet this moment left him speechless. He had never dreamed of such a fate. To him, the queen was a star high above, too far to touch. Now she had brought herself down to stand before him, her eyes filled with a quiet certainty. Daniel could not bring himself to speak, but his silence was not from rejection, it was from awe, from the weight of knowing that a woman as powerful as Isabella had chosen him out of all the men in the kingdom. The hall remained still, yet beyond its walls, the kingdom would soon buzz with endless talk. For that night, a queen had admitted what no one believed possible. She had chosen love, not by blood or title, but by heart. In that moment, the future of the kingdom began to change. And all who stood in that hall knew they had witnessed the beginning of something no one could ever forget. The days that followed were filled with whispers and endless talk. The news of the queen's words had spread from the palace to the farthest villages. People gathered in markets and on busy streets. Speaking of the moment, Isabella declared her wish to marry Daniel. Some called it the most beautiful act of love they had ever heard, while others said it was a dangerous choice that could divide the kingdom. The nobles were restless, their pride hurt by the thought that a man with no noble blood could be chosen above them, yet the common people celebrated. For to them it was a sign that their queen had a heart that beat for all, not just for the powerful. Daniel tried to live quietly in the days that followed, but the weight of the queen's words followed him everywhere. When he walked through the city, children pointed at him with wide eyes, and merchants greeted him with respect they had never shown before. Some soldiers clapped his shoulder with pride, while others looked at him with envy. He had never wanted attention, yet now he carried the gaze of an entire kingdom. At night, he lay awake, wondering if he was worthy of such a choice. He had fought battles, yes, but this felt like a test far greater than war. Inside the palace, Isabella carried herself with calm and strength. She knew her choice had shaken her court, but she refused to let doubt sway her heart. She often thought of Daniel, not as the soldier the world saw, but as the man she had watched from afar. She remembered the way he had rushed to defend a farmer's family from raiders, standing alone with nothing but his shield. She remembered the way he had helped rebuild homes after a storm, lifting stones with his hands until the work was done. She remembered how he never asked for reward, only gave what he could. These memories had built the foundation of her decision, and no noble's anger could undo it. One afternoon, Isabella invited Daniel into the palace gardens. The air was fresh with the scent of roses, and the fountains sang softly in the quiet corners of the courtyard. Daniel walked with unease, his steps heavy as he entered a world he had never imagined belonging to. He bowed deeply, but Isabella smiled and asked him to rise. Wanted him to see her not just as a queen, but as a woman who longed to share her heart. They walked side by side among the flowers, their voices soft, their words uncertain at first. She asked him of his life, of his childhood, of the battles he had fought. He spoke honestly, never hiding his fears or his doubts. She listened with care, finding in his words a truth that was rare among the nobles of her court. Daniel confessed he was afraid. He told her he feared he was not enough, that he could never match the life of a queen. His voice trembled as he spoke, yet Isabella reached for his hand and told him that what she valued most was not titles or riches, but the courage to be honest and the strength to stand for others. She told him that she had seen more nobility in his actions than in the halls of her court. For the first time, Daniel felt the weight on his heart grow lighter. Her words gave him a strength he had not known he carried, but not everyone in the palace felt the same. That very night, the nobles gathered in secret, their voices filled with anger. They spoke of tradition, of bloodlines, of power. Some whispered of plans to stop the union, believing it would weaken their hold on the kingdom. They feared what it would mean for a queen to marry a man of the people, for it would give strength to those they sought to control. Yet Isabella, unaware of their plotting, looked out from her balcony at the city lights and thought only of the man who had captured her heart. As the moon rose high, Daniel stood outside the palace gates, looking at the towers that glowed in silver light. His life had changed in ways he could not yet understand. He knew the road ahead would be hard, filled with doubt and envy, yet he also knew one truth that would guide him forward. The queen had chosen him, and for her, he would face whatever storm awaited. The palace was restless, as the days turned into weeks. The words of the queen still hung heavy in every hall, and the nobles grew more unsettled with each passing day. They tried to convince Isabella that her choice was wrong, that the kingdom would suffer if she followed her heart. Yet Isabella did not waver. She carried herself with grace, never raising her voice, but her silence was stronger than their protests. She knew that love was not a matter of birth, but of courage, and Daniel had shown more courage than all her nobles combined. Daniel, however, found himself torn between joy and fear. He had never sought power or wealth, and now he was caught in a storm he did not ask for. When he trained with the soldiers, some whispered behind his back. Some envied him, while others doubted him. But when he looked at Isabella, he felt strength return to his heart. He remembered the night in the gardens, the way she had spoken to him, not as a queen, but as a woman. Those moments reminded him that what they shared was real, and it was worth every trial. One morning, Isabella invited Daniel to join her during the council meeting. It was the first time he entered the chamber where decisions about the kingdom were made. The long table was filled with nobles dressed in silks and jewels, their eyes sharp with suspicion. Isabella sat at the head, her crown shining under the light. Daniel stood quietly at her side, unsure of his place. But Isabella's hand resting lightly on the table near him gave him comfort. When matters of borders and taxes were discussed, Daniel listened with care, though he did not speak. The nobles expected him to falter, to reveal that he did not belong. But Daniel remained steady, his presence alone a reminder that he was chosen by the queen. The nobles grew bolder as the meeting went on. One stood and asked why the queen would bring a soldier with no title into the Chamber of Lords. Another questioned if she valued tradition. But Isabella answered calmly. She told them that strength was not found in names written in books, but in deeds written in the hearts of the people. She spoke of Daniel's bravery, his loyalty, and his service to the kingdom. The room grew silent, for none could deny her words. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, but Isabella's authority left them with nothing to say. Later that day, Isabella and Daniel walked together through the city streets. It was rare for a queen to walk among her people, but Isabella wished to see the truth beyond the palace walls. The people welcomed her with cheers, and many looked at Daniel with pride. Children ran to him, asking about his battles, while mothers blessed him for his kindness. Isabella smiled as she watched him speak with them, for she saw the bond he carried with her people. It was clear that his heart was tied not only to her, but to the land itself. That night, in the quiet of her chambers, Isabella looked out at the stars. She thought of the path ahead, knowing it would not be easy. She knew that nobles would scheme, that envy would rise, and that Daniel would face trials far greater than swords. Yet she believed in him, and she believed in the power of love to change the world. Daniel, standing at the balcony nearby, felt the same. He knew that every step he took from this point on was not just for himself, but for her and for the kingdom. Beyond the palace walls, in hidden rooms lit by candlelight, the nobles continued their secret talks. They feared that Daniel's presence would weaken their hold, that his bond with Isabella would break their traditions. They whispered of ways to turn the people against him, to make the queen doubt her choice. But they did not yet understand the strength of the bond that had been formed. For Isabella and Daniel, though still at the beginning of their journey, carried within them a force far stronger than schemes or whispers. They carried love, and with it, the courage to face whatever awaited them next. The morning sun painted the palace in gold as Isabella prepared for another day of struggle. She knew her decision had planted seeds of unrest among the nobles, but her heart remained strong. Each day she walked the halls with quiet dignity, her crown steady on her head, and her resolve clear in her eyes. She was not a woman to be swayed by whispers, though she heard them in every corner. The nobles believed she would change her mind, but Isabella had chosen her path, and her heart would not betray her. Daniel spent his days training with the soldiers and learning the ways of the court. He knew he was stepping into a world that was not his own. A world built on rules and traditions that cared nothing for men like him. Yet he did not give up. Studied the customs, he listened to the advisors, and he carried himself with the same honesty that had guided him in every battle. Some mocked him, saying he could never be more than a common soldier, but others began to respect his quiet strength. They saw how he never boasted, never demanded, only listened and learned. One afternoon, Isabella invited Daniel to walk through the great library of the palace. The walls were lined with books and scrolls, filled with the wisdom of generations. She showed him the history of the kingdom, the stories of kings and queens who had ruled before her. As Daniel read the words, he felt the weight of what it meant to walk beside her. He did not see himself as a man of power, but Isabella told him power was not only in bloodlines. Power was in truth, in love, and in courage. She told him he already carried these, and it was why she had chosen him. As days turned into nights, the bond between them grew. In the gardens, they spoke of dreams, of fears, of the future they both imagined. Daniel confessed his worries that the people might suffer because of him. Isabella answered that the people already loved him, for they saw in him one of their own. She said that with him, she could bring unity to the kingdom, not division. Her words gave him hope, though deep inside, he still wondered if he could bear the weight of being beside a queen. Beyond the palace, the nobles were not still. In shadowed halls they plotted, their voices filled with anger. They feared losing their influence if Isabella wed a man without noble blood. They whispered of ways to turn the people against him, of spreading lies that would weaken his image. Some even spoke of darker acts, though they dared not yet act upon them. They waited for a chance, believing the moment would come when the queen's choice could be broken. One evening, a grand feast was held in the palace. Nobles, knights, and foreign guests filled the hall. The air was thick with music and the scent of roasted meats. Isabella sat at the high table, her gown glowing with jewels, while Daniel sat beside her, his posture straight, though his heart raced. He was aware of the many eyes on him, some filled with respect, others with scorn. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words were honest and simple, and they carried a strength the nobles could not deny. At the feast, a noble stood and mocked him openly, saying he was unworthy of the queen's hand. The hall grew silent, waiting to see what would follow. Daniel rose, his voice calm but firm. He did not speak of himself, but of service, of loyalty, of love for the kingdom. He said he did not seek the queen's crown, only her heart, and with it he would serve her and the land until his last breath. His words carried across the hall, and many who had doubted him began to see the truth. Even some nobles lowered their heads, for they could not deny his sincerity. That night when the feast was done, Isabella looked at Daniel with pride. She saw not only the soldier she had chosen, but the man who would stand with her through storms yet to come. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but together they had taken another step forward. Outside, the city still whispered, and in secret, the nobles still plotted. But the bond between Isabella and Daniel grew stronger, was a bond no scheme could easily break. The day of decision arrived, and the palace was alive with tension. The nobles had grown louder in their protests, demanding that Isabella end her choice and marry a man of noble blood. The streets outside the palace, however, were filled with common people who cheered her name and called for her to follow her heart. The kingdom was divided, and every eye waited for what the queen would do next. Isabella knew that her words on this day would shape the future of the land forever. Daniel stood in the chamber of the court, his heart heavy but steady. He had faced battles and storms, but nothing felt as heavy as the moment before him. He could hear the whispers, the doubts, the anger of the nobles who feared him. Yet he also thought of the farmers who had greeted him with smiles, the children who had run to him in the city, the women who had thanked him for his kindness. He remembered Isabella's words, that what mattered most was honesty and courage. With her hand near his, he found the strength to stand tall. When Isabella entered, silence fell. She walked to the throne, her gown flowing like a river of silver, her crown shining bright under the torches. She looked across the hall, her eyes calm but fierce. The nobles began to speak, their voices rising with demands and warnings. But Isabella raised her hand and the chamber fell quiet. She spoke not as a queen bound by tradition, but as a woman who believed in love and justice. She told them that the strength of a kingdom was not in names written in books, but in the hearts of its people. She told them that Daniel had proven his worth not by birth, but by action, not by title, but by loyalty. The nobles shook their heads, some angry, some fearful, but Isabella did not waver. She turned to Daniel and called him to her side. The chamber held its breath as he walked forward, each step echoing through the hall. When he reached her, she took his hand and raised it high for all to see. In that moment, she declared before the court and the people beyond the gates that she would make Daniel her husband. The hall erupted in voices, some in protest, others in cheers, but her decision had been made, and no voice could undo it. Outside, the cheers of the common people grew louder. They shouted Daniel's name, they shouted Isabella's name, and they called for unity. The sound reached the chamber, breaking through the walls, and even the nobles could not ignore the power of the people. For the first time, the court saw that the strength of the kingdom was not only in the hands of the powerful, but also in the hearts of the many. Isabella's choice had given them hope, and that hope could not be silenced. That night, the city was alive with lights and songs. People danced in the streets, celebrating not just the love of their queen, but the promise of a new future. Isabella and Daniel stood together on the palace balcony, looking out at the joy below. Daniel's heart was full, though he still felt the weight of the days to come. He knew the nobles would not stop, that they would continue to plot. But he also knew that with Isabella by his side and the people behind them, no scheme could easily break their bond. As the stars filled the sky, Isabella turned to Daniel and told him that this was only the beginning. Their journey would be filled with trials, but it would also be filled with love. Daniel nodded, his hand in hers, and together they stood as symbols of hope. In that moment, the kingdom was no longer divided by bloodlines or titles. It was united by love, and that love was stronger than any crown or sword. The nobles could whisper, they could plot, they could try to resist, but the choice had been made. Isabella had chosen Daniel, and with him she would lead her kingdom into a new era. An era where truth and love carried more weight than power and pride. And though the road ahead would not be easy, together they were ready to face it. For in the end, love had triumphed, and the kingdom would never